Remember, the prosecution is accusing Karen Reed of second-degree murder of her boyfriend, John O'Keefe, as well as a operating under the influence related collision causing death and a hit and run causing death. The defense is saying that Karen Reed was framed because she's a convenient outsider. We got into the testimony, well, the entirety of the testimony of Chris Albert, who owns the pizza shop that is down the road from the waterfall and then lives apparently up the road from the waterfall. Up and down may vary on where it is because we don't have a map, but from testimony, lives within walking distance of the waterfall. The pizza place is in walking distance of the waterfall. What we heard on direct examination really was that Karen had a glass with like some liquid and a lime in it that she seemed to have brought from CF McCarthy's over to the waterfall and pulled it out of her coat. When they got to the bar, Chris Albert was already there with the group that was already at the waterfall. He thought it was funny. As we got into cross-examination, we saw that Chris Albert had texted the victim, like, get over here or where are you? And if you don't come over to the waterfall, we'll fuck up your lawn. The victim, John O'Keefe, had been at the pizza place getting a slice of pizza with Chris Albert earlier not with him. He was working. He went with his nephew to get a slice of pizza earlier, and they had talked about what's happening at that night, who's going out, where people are going. We then heard a lot of conversation about timing. When Chris Albert left the bar, when he got home, how long it took him to get in bed, because the testimony was that his son Colin came home from Brian Albert's that night and opened their bedroom door and said goodnight about 10 minutes after he got home. On cross-examination, it was clarified that it was 10 minutes after he got in bed, but then it seems that he was woken up from sleep, and he said it took him 10 to 15 minutes to fall asleep after he got in bed. There's a lot of variance within minutes in that timeline of when Colin Albert got home and opened the door and said goodnight to his father. The last question of the defense's cross-examination was basically, but you didn't tell Trooper Proctor that Colin Albert was over at Brian Albert's house that evening when you spoke to him. We also got into the relationship between this Albert, Chris Albert, and Trooper Proctor and how long he's known Trooper Proctor's sister. And then we got into the back and forth of, hey kid, get off my lawn. The defense asked if that was Colin. The witness said, no, that was my son Dylan, and then gave a whole story that the judge allowed in of, no, one day my kid, before the victim put up a fence on his lawn, my kid was cutting across his lawn because it cut off, he said, minutes of the walk home from school. And John yelled out the window, hey kid, get off my lawn, which the witness said scared Dylan. Dylan went home, told his mom called Jen. Jen told John. John went over and said, I was joking. He put a fence up on his lawn. And then this witness, Chris Albert, and his wife titled John O'Keefe in the wife's phone saved contact as Mr. Nevercracker, a character from a movie that didn't want people on his lawn. But he just went very quickly through that whole story. I guess we will see later why all of this ties together. The defense talked about Colin Albert in their opening. I imagine that's why they went so much into the timing and when Colin Albert got home. But the testimony, you could see variations definitely in how quickly he answered, what he didn't remember, how frustrated he got. There were lots and lots of variances throughout that testimony where you could definitely see what the witness was feeling about the questions being asked to him. And now the court is on a quick break. At the end of the half day of day 8 of court, after the court took their morning recess, we got into the testimony of Julie Albert. Julie Albert is the wife of Chris Albert, the Canton Town selectman, who also owns the pizza shop that is near the waterfall and CF McCarthy's in what seems to be downtown Canton. Her testimony on direct examination often felt like, why are we here though? She mostly talked about when she arrived at the waterfall, which is consistent with the video when she left the waterfall because she had a migraine, that she had been drinking wine before she left, and that when Karen Reed arrived, she saw Karen pull like a clear glass out of her jacket that had liquid in it. I don't know if she said that it had a lime in it or not. It had liquid in it, and that she made a crack about her bringing a drink or something in the glass from the other bar into this bar. And then shortly thereafter, she left and went home and got in bed. But even though she left and went home and got in bed, she was not asleep when her son came home sometime after midnight. She also said that she and her son had a bit of a conversation when he got home. She did not notice any injury to him or anything out of sorts. That contradicted her husband's testimony that said the son just kind of opened the door and said goodnight. But that's where we're at with that testimony. And then we got into the next morning. It was her testimony that she regularly takes Dunkin' Donuts to her nephew, Brian Albert Jr., for his birthday. And that when she got up that morning, she had a missed call from around 5:55 a.m. from who she described as one of her closest friends or best friends, Jen McCabe. She did not call Jen McCabe back, she says, and she went over to her brother-in-law's house to leave donuts for her nephew. She said she got out of the car, and this was sometime after 8:39 a.m., got out of the car, went to go put donuts in Brian Albert Jr.'s car, which she said was unlocked, and then saw Brian Albert Sr. come to the door, and he said, "Come inside." And then she stopped and said, "Would you come inside?" And then she said, "No, I'm just dropping off donuts." And he said, "You need to come inside." But she also said that she noticed Jen McCabe's car was there, but didn't say she thought anything of it. So she gets a missed call at 5:55 a.m. on a Saturday in a blizzard. She goes over to her brother and sister-in-law's house to leave donuts. She sees her best friend's car. Now remember, her bestie Jen McCabe is also sisters with Brian Albert's wife, her sister-in-law. And when she is invited inside or told to come inside, she's like, "Nah, I'm good." You don't want to know why your best friend is over at her sister's house that early in the morning in a blizzard after missing a phone call at 5:55 a.m. You don't have any questions about that at all? And then she gets inside. She talks about everyone who's inside at that time, which is Jen and Matt McCabe, her brother-in-law, Brian Albert, his wife, and that they were all sitting in the kitchen talking. And then it took about 30 seconds for them to say something happened to John. And she was like, "John who?" And they said, "John O'Keefe." And then this witness left the Albert residence at 34 Fairview, went home and woke up her husband and said, "Something happened. We're going back over to the Albert house at 34 Fairview." And then they left and went back to 34 Fairview. Her husband's testimony is that he woke up on his own and sometime later his wife was there, but he was still laying in bed. Then we get into her relationship with Trooper Proctor's sister. So the witness, Julie Albert, is very close friends with Courtney Proctor, the sister of lead investigator Trooper Proctor. The witness's sister, Julie Albert's sister, is also very close friends with Courtney Proctor. They grew up together. This witness used to provide childcare for Courtney Proctor's children 2 days a week. The defense asked, did Courtney Proctor tell her brother, Trooper Proctor, that you could provide childcare from them? And because that is speculation and hearsay, that was immediately objected to and sustained. But the question is out there lingering, and now I have questions about it. Then we learn that from this witness that though she and Courtney Proctor are close, that they don't talk on the phone much. She said, "No, we mostly text." And then the defense brought up the phone records and started asking about the 67 phone calls the two of them had shared in a fairly few months period of time. Then they got to the point that some of those phone calls were happening the day that Karen Reed was arrested, the day that Karen Reed was arraigned, and there were numerous phone calls on the day of the arraignment, both before and after, one of them for almost 30 minutes. The defense asked this witness, were you using Courtney Proctor as a go-between to talk about this case with Trooper Proctor? And the witness said no. And then we got into the 67 different phone calls, or started to. We have not finished cross-examination yet. But it's clear that the witness Julie Albert, Chris Albert's wife, is very close with Courtney Proctor, Trooper Proctor's sister, spending time at the family pool, spending time with Trooper Proctor's mother and father at the family pool. Their kids are spending time together. All of it making more clear to me that Trooper Proctor should never have been the one interviewing Chris Albert and Julie Albert, and maybe others in the Albert family. It was a very interesting cross-examination. Some things were recalled with a swiftness and quite a bit of clarity, and others were not at all. Cross-examination on that is going to resume on Friday morning. I think there's probably a lot more to go about these phone calls with Courtney Proctor and this witness. I think there's more to go with the relationship between the Proctors and at least Christopher and Julie Albert at this point. And there's lots more to go about the whereabouts of Colin Albert and when he left Brian Albert's home. So my question that I'm left with at the end of day 8 is, how did Trooper Proctor end up being the lead investigator on this case when Canton PD recused themselves for the appearance, they say, of impropriety because Brian Albert's other brother, Kevin, well, one of his other brothers, Kevin Albert, is a Canton police officer, and the home and the crime scene where the victim was found is Brian Albert's home. How did Trooper Proctor not also say someone else in the state police should be the lead investigator on this case? And I think the defense has some pretty strong theories about why that is. I'm very curious as to how that assignment happened. Very, very curious. Aren't we all just now waiting for Jen McCabe's testimony and Trooper Proctor's testimony? Isn't that what we're waiting for at this point? I know I am. We'll see how this turns out at the beginning of day 9. For deep dives into the stories that I covered here, you can find them on my YouTube channel at The Emily D. Baker and The Emily Show podcast. I stream every Tuesday and Thursday. The podcast goes live on Wednesdays. And if you want to stay in the loop with everything I'm doing, receive the fastest notifications out there, and get more Law Nerd community, join me at lawnerdapp.com, our free app for iOS and Android.